Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Think, my vlog, which comes out periodically to help you think a little bit broader and understand maybe some of the issues which affect us all every day. In episode 3 and in this new year, and of course Happy New Year to everybody, 2018, it is unfortunate that I need to begin the new year already in the first week of January. We had some issues with regards to what I think was an overreaction from a certain group in Malta who overreacted to an opinion piece which was placed in the Times of Malta. And I'll tell you why I think it's an overreaction and why we need to be very careful when we start talking about censoring other people just because we don't like what they say. Let me start off first of all by being very clear so that I'm not misinterpreted, and I know people like to misinterpret others to gain an advantage. I am all in favor of equality between men and women. In fact, I've never thought any differently. I've never thought that women in any way are less than men. I have, and so have you, understood and accepted, and you accept every day, that men and women are equal, but different. We're different in that we have different capacities. For example, men are stronger. We tend to be a bit faster. That's the reason why men and women don't compete in the same sports of the same class. They compete in the same class, the same sex, rather than mixing men and women in the shot put, for example, or the javelin throw. Simply because men and women are equal, we have our human rights, we are all equal in front of the law, yet we are different. And therefore, being different, we have our different foibles, which is a word, I think, which upset a few of these, a few feminists who took umbrage at the word foible in an article written by a certain Charles Caruana Cabarez. The editorial in the Times of Malta was clear that it was an overreaction. There's even some liberal writers who are seeing this as a total overreaction. And I'd like to put my sixpence in there and explain why I think it's also dangerous apart from being an overreaction. Well, when you start calling for the censorship of what other people say, then you're running the risk of also affecting what people think. This is why freedom of expression is very, very, very important, and that we defend it, of course, is sacred. You see, we all have a right to speak up and to voice our views and opinions. But the moment that somebody says your opinion is of the wrong politics or the wrong opinion, and therefore you should be shut down, therefore you should be censored or sanctioned in this case, in other words, threatened with repercussions if you speak up again, that's basically very unhealthy. To me, that's more akin to what we call cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is only just beginning to be understood by mainstream populace. Basically what it is a new form of communism, Marxism, which now travels through the vehicle of democracy using political correctness as its primary whipping machine. In other words, you are whipped with the being completely wrong and unpolitically correct when you speak out and say things which certain interest groups and powerful lobby groups deem to be untouchable areas. When you start to do these sort of things, then anyone and anything can be censored and shut down. We began to see the beginning of this and feel the pressure of this political correctness with the re-engineering of terminology and semantics. For example, if you spoke up and said you didn't agree with, for example, like I often spoke up, I don't personally agree that 2 men or 2 women should and can get married, then you're called homophobic. You're labeled as being extremist. You're called a fundamentalist because you have views which are time-tested, cherished societal values, which other people are trying to change. And because they know they're difficult to change, what they generally do is then they shout you down, label you, and even go as far as threatening you. Those of you who are too young will not realize that this sort of language is very familiar to people who lived through the Cold War period. We were used to hearing what was happening behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union and its satellite states, that voices of dissent were crushed. You weren't allowed to express views against the government or policies which the government said were the right views. And anything that went against the views which were established by who knows who as being the new norms, anyone and anything that did that was then shut down, or even it went as far in those days as being disappeared. So we are in a very delicate stage, I think. And I think overreacting to certain people who are simply voicing what is a normal opinion. In fact, if you go to Charles Caruana Cabrez's letter or opinion piece and read it, I ask anyone who was offended, which are very few apparently, but they were seriously offended, and they got the Office of Equality and the NCPE, I think they're called, to also protest. And we even had a certain ministerial department protesting and asking for sanctions against this gentleman who really absolutely meant no harm. So if you could read that letter, tell me if you can find one word that shames women, that lowers the status of women. When you just simply state the matter of fact how you see them, women tend to gossip more. If I say that to you now, most people would see that as just a normal, yeah, we do. We also, women would say, can multitask. And then men say, well, we can't multitask, but we can do this. Those are the differences between us. That's what makes us unique. In a sense, women and men are inseparable. We need each other. We need our equality and our differences to be a whole family unit when we get together, we get married and have children. It's what's wonderful about the human relationship, what's amazing about marriage, that people who are so different yet still find a way to get along. But the moment we start attacking these norms, then we're entering some very shaky ground. So basically my message would be, let's add a little bit of caution over here, a little bit of tolerance, so that those who claim to be supporting equality and rights don't become themselves by default the ones who are doing all the intolerance. We all have to be very careful that we don't create a situation where we create a climate where it becomes men against women. Now, I know that for certain interest groups, this is actually what they want. It may surprise you to hear it, but I've been following this up since 2004. So I know what's going on a larger scale and can see signs of it happening here in Malta. Already in the United States and in the UK, but primarily in the United States, they have societal issues based upon this overreaction by especially feminists, okay? Feminism today has become not about what it should be, which is an honorable thing to be. Feminism has become about man-hating. In other words, anything male or white is privileged. In other words, if you're male or white, you have no right to speak up about anything, and there must be no hint of you ever expressing any views that may in some way be connected to or related to females. That's absolutely ludicrous, because we live in a society where this happens all the time. Our interactions are full of them. Overseas, it's got so bad that I remember once, just two and a half, 3 years ago, I was in Vienna and I was in a hotel and I was waiting for the lift. There was a woman who turned up right after me to go into this lift. We were both waiting for the lift. I had pressed the button. When the lift appeared, I made way and asked if she'd like to go first. I got insulted. I got screamed at. She told me off for being sexist. She said, why didn't you go first? Why are you telling me? Am I less than you? This is the confusion. I mean, obviously I was completely taken aback and I couldn't believe what was happening, because I thought that was the chivalrous thing to do. Most of the time, women can look after themselves. Most of the time, they don't need men to protect them. But being the stronger sex, if you like, the physically stronger sex, then it's in our nature to want to protect. Just as it's in the nature of a woman to want to protect their child, for example. Men have less of an instinct, less of a drawing and an understanding, because they don't have that maternal instinct. This is what makes us different, and it's okay to be different but equal. So when equality becomes man-hating, when equality becomes oppression rather than the defenders of intolerance and the defenders of certain rights become the ones who are actually becoming the intolerant ones and the ones who are oppressing, then it becomes very, very, very dangerous. And those are my thoughts. You may or may not agree with these, and that's okay, as long as we're thinking a little bit broader than simply that guy was wrong and she was right, because it's never as simple as black and white. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Think in a couple of weeks. Thank you.